All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Impact and Coffee, our first Impact and Coffee of 2021. It's going to be an amazing, amazing year. For folks who are not panelists, we're going to ask that you turn off your video and mute your audio, please, so that we can focus on the panel. And for panelists who are not on just yet, if you could turn off your video, that would be really helpful so that we can actually focus on our speakers for just a moment. And for some reason, we are seeing everybody's video right now. Make sure that we have that, and we'll do the speaker. There we go. I'm Robert Nelson. I'm the program manager for Pivotal New Mexico. I'm also your co-host. I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Michael Green. Good morning, Michael. How are you doing today?
Good morning, everyone. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing, Robert?
Doing all right. Happy New Year to everybody. So this is our first Impact and Coffee of 2021, like I mentioned before, and we're doing something very special. So we have a lot of folks who are here talking about the legislative session that's coming up. And there are a lot of organizations that are a lot to do with the upcoming session. So we have a very, very busy Impact and Coffee today to talk really cool stuff happening. And so it is, we also just want to make sure that we acknowledge where we are. So if you check my name, Robert Blanqueta Nelson, he, him, and I am on occupied Tiwa territory. It is important to acknowledge the folks that came first. And it's also important to take action around indigenous programming and communities and what they're advocating for too. So if you could in the chat, please introduce yourselves, your name, your organization, your pronouns, and what you're hoping to get from today. Michael, it is Gratitude Tuesday. Is there anything you're grateful for?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this, and I know that we were, New Mexico was below 1,000 new cases yesterday with COVID. So I'm thankful for that, we're back on the going down. So let's hope we continue this momentum and we're able to see much more in-person 2021 eventually. How about you, Robert? Is there anything that you're thankful or grateful for today?
I am grateful for a new year. I know the last couple of weeks have been a little rough, but I think it's still like looking up in terms of where we can go from here. So I'm happy for fresh new starts and for just the newness of a new year, so to speak. So for those of you who've never joined Impact and Coffee before, it is a welcoming conversation to build community within the nonprofit sector. We're just going to go ahead and, Michael, I think it's okay. Do you think we should go ahead and get started? We can move on to our first speaker. Is that cool? And do you want to?
Sounds great to me.
Actually, I'll just pass to Felipe, who is with New Mexico Dream Team. Felipe, when you introduce just as you're talking, could you just introduce yourself, your organization, and just tell us about what activities y'all are getting into with the legislative session, please?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Can you hear me well? Awesome. So I'm Felipe. I'm part of the New Mexico Dream Team. We're a statewide network led by immigrant youth and youth of color. For this legislative session, I want to mention two important issues that our organization has been advocating for a while now. One of them is licensing, and I don't mean driver's licenses. I mean licensing to be able to work in a profession or an occupation. A couple of years ago, we realized that some of our leaders were graduating from different programs, for example, med school, and were not able to get their license to be a nurse or a doctor. And then looking into that issue, we realized that New Mexico is the state that has one of the highest rates of licenses that are needed for you. You basically need a license to do anything here. And so we knew that we needed to pass legislation to ensure that people were able to obtain those regardless of immigration status. And so last year we passed SB 137, which opened the opportunity for people to access those licenses in most professions and occupations. However, there's still work left to do. This year we're introducing another piece of legislation that will do the same thing for a few more occupations that we were not able to impact last time, such as the real estate license to be a realtor. There's some people in the organization that want to be that and are not able because they don't have immigration status and they cannot get their license. Another industry impacted is the license to be an insurance agent. All of this occupations are accessible for many people to work in, especially many people in our community. And we think it's going to be really important as we're rebuilding the economy that we ensure all of these pathways are accessible to everyone in New Mexico, including immigrant families, so that we don't get stuck in an economic recession for years. Another issue that I want to mention is the issue of private detention and private incarceration in the state. New Mexico is the most reliant state on the private detention industry. We host many private prisons where people from our communities are being held, as well as private immigrant detention centers where people also from our communities that are immigrants or people that are showing up to our border are being put in cages, all for the sake, or all to make a profit. And we have seen and demonstrated how this the corporations doing this are only benefiting themselves and are not benefiting our state. They're actually making our state lose money with really sketchy contracts and not good deals. During the pandemic, we have realized that they don't really care about the safety of anyone in their facilities, including people that work there, and including the communities around them, which are rural, vulnerable communities, and all around are not a good relationship or a good investment for our state, as well as the inhumane practice of putting our people in cages just to make a profit. And so we're part of a big group of organizations. I know ACLU is here and we'll probably mention this bill as well. So add anything that I missed. But this legislation will make sure to cap contracts and prevent new contracts with corporations so that we protect our counties and our communities into getting into really bad contracts and unsafe and inhumane circumstances. We're also going to be supporting a lot of initiatives by our organizations, ensuring that everyone in the community has access to healthcare and economic security, which, given the situation that we're in, it's going to be really important. And so looking forward to the legislative session.
Thanks, Felipe. I really appreciate that. We can jump to Sephora Nefesh at New Mexico Thrives.
Good morning. So I am Sephora Nefesh at New Mexico Thrives, and I am working on an amendment. New Mexico Thrives is working on an amendment to the anti-donation clause. For those of you who may not know about it, it dates back to our Constitution. It is Article 9, Section 14, and it was inserted in our Constitution to prevent fly-by-night railway companies from defrauding the state and the people of New Mexico. It had a purpose. It still has a purpose, but it is interpreted in such a way in New Mexico that it prevents a lot of good work from happening. And so the amendment that's being proposed is tentatively called the Vibrant Communities Act, and it is modeled after the Local Economic Development Act, which has been in place for at least a couple of decades now. And LEDA is what has allowed the state to give Netflix and Facebook millions of dollars, and yet nonprofits and others working for the public good have difficulty getting thousands of dollars from the state. So hopefully this amendment will streamline the process and make it easier for dollars that have been committed by the state to actually get mobilized in the community and put to work for the benefit of all community members. And that's the anti-donation clause amendment in a nutshell. And I don't know if anybody has a question about that or if we're saving questions till the end.
We are saving questions to the end, Sephora. Could you talk a little bit about how people can get involved in this legislation, please?
Sure. There are two ways. One is that they can contact me with stories if they have encountered the anti-donation clause as a barrier to their work. They can share that story with me because I am collecting those stories as evidence as to why this bill needs to be amended, or why the article needs to be amended. And the other way is to watch for when that legislation comes up in committees and to support it, to attend the committee meetings, which will all be via Zoom, and to stand in support of the bill.
Nice. Thank you so much, Sephora, for sharing all that information with us. And then this is just kind of to the general audience. At the end, we're going to be doing a breakout session. So if you do have questions for Sephora or any of the other panelists, you will be able to select to go to their specific breakout room. So be on the lookout for that about 9:45. So next up, we have Jacob Vigil with New Mexico Voices. So Jacob, please share with us what you are doing during this legislative session.
Good morning, everyone. Jacob Vigil, New Mexico Voice for Children. So I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because I want to give a little bit of background. Talking about our legislative focus this session is really, as it usually is, improving child well-being through tax and budget policy. So I'll talk about some of the tax legislation that we are going to be working on. So just some background, we know that with the COVID pandemic and the resulting economic downturn, low-income New Mexicans have been at greater risk, not just in the public health crisis. As you can see here, the rate of infections is higher. But we also know that low-wage workers are hardest hit by COVID-19. And there's a whole lot more data than this, but I think that the point is to show that, working parents and kids have borne the brunt of this pandemic, right? That there's housing insecurity, food insecurity, things that already were major issues in New Mexico have just been exacerbated by this crisis, right? So tax policy is a powerful tool that can help advance equity because it determines who pays their fair share of taxes, who doesn't, and who benefits the most from the way the tax system is structured. So in New Mexico, our tax system is upside down. Those at the highest brackets of income pay the smallest percentage of their income, while those at the bottom pay a higher percentage, right? So that's a regressive tax system. And the tax system benefits white taxpayers disproportionately. So, this is just one element of sort of a racial and ethnic inequity that that we think can be addressed through reforms and changes to the tax code. There are many other issues of racial inequity that have been exacerbated by COVID. But this is one where we feel like it's pretty straightforward and can be addressed through some changes in the tax code. So I'll go through what we'll be working on in the session. The Working Families Tax Credit it's our state version of the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's claimed by about a quarter of filers, including many thousands of veterans. The value of it goes to working families with kids, and it's proven through many studies to improve outcomes for kids, including health, education outcomes, and things like that. It's good for business in the economy. It puts money back in people's pockets where they can spend locally, and it's a very proven method for reducing poverty. So we propose to end exclusion. So extend it to I-10 filers. So that would include undocumented folks, workers, extend it to young workers, 18 to 24. We propose to increase the rate of the tax credit. So just make it a little bit more. It's indexed to the federal EITC, and then increase the amount of it for parents with young children, and also a temporary increase to help essential workers and low-income working families meet their basic needs during the time of the recession. And as you see at the bottom of my slides, we're showing that, based on polling, that, a large percentage of New Mexicans, a majority, support these proposals. A second thing is the low-income comprehensive tax rebate. So this is another tax credit targeted to very low-income taxpayers, benefits children, families, and seniors. It was designed to offset the regressivity of the tax code, but it is very it's not used as much as it could be, and it hasn't been updated in 22 years. So what we propose to do is index it to inflation, to current levels of inflation. So they would increase the income threshold, so more people would be eligible, 125,000 more New Mexicans per year. The cost is relatively low. I mean, for something that has such an impact for those who are struggling the most, and then temporarily doubling it to provide crucial COVID relief. Another thing we're working on is stable, sustainable revenue. And the background for that is that, as we all know, being dependent on oil and gas makes our state budget really volatile and not super stable in the long run. So, and there's projected declines in oil and gas revenue. So in order to reduce volatility and have a broader, stronger foundation for revenue and for all of these programs that support low-income and working families, our proposals are to increase, repeal things like the capital gains deduction, increase rates at the high end for income tax and corporate income tax, and then raise the rates slightly for more profitable corporations. So I can go a little bit into more detail on that. I know I just want to be sensitive to the time, but this is sort of the other side of tax, of making tax policy more progressive, right? We're putting money in the form of credits into the hands of working families, but we're also making revenue more stable by making sure that those who can afford it are paying their fair share. And it's a step toward weaning ourselves off of the volatility of oil and gas. So, our philosophy is that investing in families and communities will drive economic recovery. Austerity is not the way to do that. Meeting basic needs and creating opportunities for our workers, getting money in the economy in their hands is the surest path to recover from the pandemic. One more thing I'll point out, because I don't know if anyone else is covering this, but we're also going to move a bill on fines and fees. So this is, it would remove many of the fines and fees from the New Mexico Children's Code, and that includes court fees and fines associated with, possession of cannabis, things like that. So, a lot of jurisdictions depend on, or claim to depend on these sort of court fines and fees, which are disproportionately levied on youth of color. And it actually is not a substantial source of revenue. It actually costs more in many cases to collect these fines and fees than jurisdictions actually get in revenue. So it's a very sort of clear-cut way to sort of achieve equity in the criminal justice system, but also in just removing the burden of this debt from families and youth who we know that there are a lot of underlying causes for involvement in the criminal justice system that this is not making any progress toward addressing. What you can do to help: call and write your legislators. I don't think any of these bills that I've mentioned have numbers yet, but that's something we can, if you follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter at nmvoices.org, those updates will be shared. And yeah, just, call and write your legislators, attend public committee hearings, and give public comment. But to learn more about these bills as the session continues, follow us on our newsletter or social media.
Nice. Thank you so much, Jacob, for sharing all of that, and also your contact information, and also, again, the importance of contacting your legislators. Thank you for repeating that. Yeah, so next up, we have James from the Center for Civic Policy. So James, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am going to share my screen here. One moment. Great. So I'm James Poviwa, and I'm the Policy Director for the Center for Civic Policy, he, him, his. Center for Civic Policy is a C3 advocacy organization focused on fostering broad, inclusive civic engagement among our state's diverse, underrepresented communities through policy work, voter engagement, and issue education campaigns. And we also convene the New Mexico Civic Engagement Table, which has 40 plus partners from across the state. Many of the presenters here today are members of the Civic Engagement Table, and organizations focus on a variety of issues, including democracy reform, tax and budget reform, workers' rights, immigrants' rights, environmental and climate justice. Today, what I'll be talking about is, so these are some of the members of the Civic Engagement Table. Today, I'm going to be talking about our Power for New Mexico Coalition, which is Somos un Pueblo Unido, Center for Civic Policy, NEVA, OLE, New Mexico Café, the Policy Solutions Institute, and Conservation Voters New Mexico, including many of our partners at the Civic Engagement Table as well. Power for New Mexico actually came out of advocacy for the Energy Transition Act, with the concern that people of color, communities of color, rural communities, immigrants would be left behind as our state transitions away from oil and gas. And so Power for New Mexico seeks to engage the most impacted communities in the debate around renewable energy and the preservation of our environment, build a robust infrastructure to reach, engage, and activate the public to provide direct opportunities to become a stakeholder in New Mexico's transition to a renewable energy economy, and to create an avenue for the public to become involved in the innovation of our state's economy by embracing and being part of the energy evolution, which is happening right now. So as I mentioned, Power for New Mexico became involved in organizing around the Energy Transition Act. And during the advocacy for the ETA, we advocated for training programs, a specific study to be conducted by the Department of Workforce Solutions, and our efforts around just transition. We also work in communications and ongoing organizing. I'm going to skip the portion on communications and move into the work around the ETA. So we were part of the broader coalition of groups that successfully passed the ETA. The ETA established, as you know, a 100% coal-free by 2040 energy production standard for the state. Power for New Mexico was instrumental in getting workforce and economic development language into the bill to ensure jobs and economic benefits for New Mexicans within the emerging clean energy sector. We also, as I mentioned, advocated for a New Mexico Department of Workforce study, an allocation of $200,000 and the mandate for the department to conduct this study to develop a roadmap to integrate underrepresented communities within the economic transition. And our sponsor and our partner on that was Representative Angelica Rubio. So this study was conducted at the beginning of this year and was completed in July. Much of the work that came out of the study is influencing the legislation that I'll be talking about in a moment. So the goals of the study were to identify opportunities and barriers in the transition to a clean energy economy in low-income and rural communities, and to develop recommendations that address the expected demand for increased career and technical education, job training, and workforce development needed to prepare industries, workers, and communities to take full advantage of emerging clean energy jobs. We also wanted to identify and prioritize disadvantaged communities to prepare for economic development opportunities in sustainable and clean energy economy. So all of that study was what influenced our just transition legislation. I think it's important to note that we reached about 1,800 New Mexicans through a survey and through specific focus groups Each one of the organizations within Power for New Mexico hosted a focus group with their community members. And what was identified as some of the points important to include in a just transition are that renewable energy jobs should be expanded beyond wind and solar, and they should include areas like outdoor recreation and land reclamation. Current and future training programs that receive state funds must be multilingual. Community workforce agreements should be in place for renewable projects over a certain size. There should be a prioritization of minority and women-owned businesses and renewable projects. We should locate new training programs in tribal and rural areas. And we should prohibit the requirement of drug testing as requirements for state-funded renewable energy jobs and training programs. There should be coordination among departments like MNERD, the Department of Workforce Solutions, the Environment Department, Indian Affairs, Public Education, Higher Education, and an Office of Just Transition should be created. We should step up regional advisory committees for just transition, similar to what is going on with the Energy Transition Act. There should be project labor agreements required for all new renewable projects over a certain size, and we should place pre-apprenticeship programs in each county or targeted counties. So the bill is currently being drafted and will be introduced in the 2021 session. I think a really important thing to note here, and my colleague Camilla Feibelman will be presenting on this, is the dual effort around climate resiliency. And too often equity is a second thought to our work, especially in all of the different policy arenas. And so with climate resiliency and our efforts to build relationships across advocacy organizations, we want to ensure that just transition is an integral part of climate resiliency as well. And so here's my contact information. I'll also put it in the chat. And I look forward to questions, and I will turn it back to you all.
All right, thank you so much, James, for sharing all of that information. It was very helpful and useful, and hopefully get some good questions and contacts from it. So as James mentioned, he and Camila have been working together on some multiple things. So I'd like to introduce Camila now from the Sierra Club. So take it away, Camila.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting this every year. It's not just a great way to present our priorities, but to also hear about other folks' priorities. And thanks to James and CCP and Power for New Mexico for really convening people around the issue of just transition and making sure that it's a top priority. I'm the director of the Rio Grande chapter of the Sierra Club. And for us, there are many urgencies on multiple fronts. The COVID crisis has really brought out not just how air quality affects people. If you live in bad air, you're also more likely to have bad outcomes when it comes to COVID. But the climate crisis with its intense forest fires, drought, impacts on agriculture, impacts on the quality of our ecosystems, really highlights how big of a crisis the climate crisis is. However, we can't make that economic transition and that technological transition without first putting communities first and putting workers first and looking for solutions that are going to work for everybody. Because if people get left behind, we're going to have a problem where people aren't going to be supportive of these urgent changes that we need to make. So we and a huge coalition of groups worked hard in the 2019 legislative session to pass the Energy Transition Act. And as James said, that braided together several top priorities for us. First, incredibly high renewables requirements that all the utilities have to comply with in order to generate electricity for all of us. We wanted them to be able to refinance the outstanding investment in this old polluting coal, saving ratepayers money while doing that, but also saving so much that we could invest around $40 million in just transition funds that communities are working on deciding how to use right now. And that would also create additional severance pay, not just for plant workers, but also for mine workers who aren't employed by PNM. So those three pieces are braided together. And if you pull one piece out, a lot of the benefits really will collapse. So we are standing in firm opposition to attempts to amend the Energy Transition Act. We think that these amendments really are based on some incorrect premises, but even worse than that, we're concerned it'll mean that it's less likely that the utilities use this refinancing mechanism, and that would mean that there would be no just transition funding available for frontline communities. So we're available to talk to people who have more detailed technical questions about that. We also think in this session that just has so many limiting factors, and given the fact that New Mexicans are really demanding bold, transformative change, that we should instead be looking at how to move beyond the climate transition on the electric sector. This is all the generation of how to flip the lights on, how to keep your fridge cold, to dealing with climate reductions across the industries of New Mexico and joining that in importance with the just transition efforts. So we have legislation that would build climate resiliency and really reduce carbon emissions from all the industries in New Mexico: oil and gas, transportation, buildings, and then do that in a way that's deeply tied to the efforts to build out new workforce fronts, new just transition opportunities. So that's a top priority for our organization. A second issue, although it's sort of in a different form, the climate stuff is the atmosphere, but also oil and gas has huge impacts on our freshwater supplies. In 2019, there was a so-called Produced Water Act that passed very quickly. We were able to get some fixes onto that bill, but there's still more to do. What is produced water? You can't really call it water. It's sort of oil and gas waste, toxic muck that may be radioactive. They add chemicals to water, they frack the well, that liquid comes in encounter with old ancient waters filled with radioactivity potentially and saline salts, and that comes spewing back up the oil well. And so, yes, it is a priority to get them to use that waste liquid again, quote unquote, recycling it. However, just because you're reusing it or recycling it doesn't mean you're doing that safely, and doesn't mean that it's being done well. In fact, there's a major produced water spill in New Mexico every day. We had the case of Penny O'Coin being doused in produced water that was spilling out of a pipeline running by her land. So we have worked with a team to create a whole series of amendments, not just to the Produced Water Act, but also the Oil and Gas Act, the Water Quality Act, that will make all of this safer. We'll be working to end commercial trapping of animals for sale of pelts on public lands. A lot of times people's dogs get stuck in these traps. Species that aren't supposed to be trapped get stuck. There's a whole other big list of environmental bills that are all really great, and we'll be sharing a list of those bills and activating our grassroots lobby list on our issues, but we also want to hear about your issues. We're standing in solidarity on policing reforms. Every environment should be safe, no matter where you are. Looking at how the Civil Rights Act might be helpful there, on qualified immunity. So we're here, we're available, and James and I will be breaking out in one breakout room together to focus on just transition and climate. Thank you.
Thanks, Camilla. I appreciate it. With that, we will move on to Devonta Watson. If you could, Devonta, make yourself available and talk a little bit about the Crown Act.
Mic check, mic check. Can everyone hear me? Oh, yes. There we go. Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Impact and Coffee. This is always such a great space to be in and to share great and to incubate great ideas. Today, I want to talk a little bit about the Crown Act. I'll be sharing a little bit about that, and also a brief dovetail into another piece of legislation that will be being proposed this legislative session dealing with African American youth. When the 1964 Civil Rights Act was signed into law, our country sided with the philosophy of the civil rights movement that it was time to end racial humiliation derived from structural and social violence. We now embark upon this new era where the same racial violence has disguised itself into the fabrics of our country, such as exhibiting unconscious bias towards people that are different than self, and even into public policy and its relationships with people of color. For many in this country, including Black women, racism doesn't just stop at the color of their skin, but also by the immutable textures, patterns, and stylings of hair. Since before the founding of this country, Black hair has been a hyper-politicized topic where Eurocentric features and characteristics were and continue to be used as yardsticks for beauty and attractiveness while stigmatizing other ethnic hairstyles. In order to assimilate to these features, people of African descent must chemically alter and or apply extreme heat to a distinctive part of their body, thereby removing an indicator of cultural identity. Today, African Americans are disproportionately burdened by workplace policies and practices in public spaces that target, single, or profile them out for having natural hairstyles. This means having hairstyles that include protective hairstyles like braids, locks, twists, tight coils or curls, cornrows, bantu knots, afros, weaves, wigs, and even head wraps. In a 2019 study conducted by the Joy Collective to identify the magnitude of racial discrimination based on hair, Black women are 30% more likely to receive formal policies for appearance, including hair. Why, you may ask? Because natural hair is stigmatized and is 3.4 times more likely to be seen as an unprofessional look. Since a New Jersey high school wrestler was forced to cut off his locked hair in order to participate in a match in 2019, this issue of racial discrimination based on hair has propelled into a national conversation. In addition, many New Mexicans were startled by the action of a Cibola High School teacher who cut off the braid of an indigenous female student and remarked to her in derogatory terms. For these students and countless others who have encountered discrimination based on hair, this inflicts potentially traumatic events that can develop into adverse childhood experiences. There is currently a growing number of states that are engaging in the process to create a respectful and open world for natural hair by passing the Crown Act. First passed in the state of California, the Crown Act further defines the definition of race to include stylings of hair in public education, public accommodations, and housing, making it illegal to discriminate based upon hair. Passing the Crown Act in New Mexico will have far-reaching implications to protect our diverse communities from egregious acts of hatred and structural violence. In large, making this law in our great state of New Mexico would make it necessary to amend the New Mexico Human Rights Act and New Mexico education law. In closing, identity is inextricably linked to the relationship and presentation of hair. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to Impact in Coffee, and I urge you to learn more about how hair discrimination is racial discrimination. We appreciate all of the Black women who have stepped forward to share their testimonies throughout this process on this important issue. They were referred to as the Central Organizing Committee. this entire process has been a learning process for us all, and we have learned that you can never have a big enough circle, such as the Crown Coalition in New Mexico, to suggest and pass the Crown Act in New Mexico. As we have seen in recent news, it recently passed as a city ordinance amending the human rights ordinance in the city of Albuquerque. And that was passed last Monday in the last council meeting, and has already been proposed for the upcoming legislature. Has been pre-filed by Representative Stapleton, who is really taking the lead on this, in addition to Senator Harold Pope in the Senate, Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez, Senator Linda Lopez, Senator Shannon Pinto, all co-sponsors of this bill. We're really appreciative of their leadership. And I also want to just dovetail and brief to the New Mexico Black Education Act, which is seeking to create an advisory council to the Public Education Department Secretary to raise the Secretary on African American Affairs and Student Affairs, which would also create a liaison position to create a consistent dialogue to the Education Secretary. It would also call for an annual report on the status of African American students, and would create a system and infrastructure to create and procedures on racial occurrences that may happen in public schools. It creates the procedures and policies and guidelines to move forward on how to go about those situations. And last, there was something that I left in the chat about Martin Luther King Day. There is something that the city of Albuquerque is doing for Martin Luther King Day, and it's called the 30 Days of Nonviolence. And the 30 Days of Nonviolence is a day of 30 days of pledging to live a nonviolent lifestyle, and seeking to understand the 6 philosophies of Dr. Martin Luther King. You can learn more about that by going to www.cabqnv.com, and I left that in the chat. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Devonta. It's so great to hear from you today. Our last but certainly not least is Baron over at ACLU. Baron, if you could unmute yourself and make yourself available. Look forward to hearing from you. Oh, did we lose Baron? While we're waiting for Baron, I just want to remind folks that we're going to try to move in. We're going to move into breakout groups, and once we open the rooms, folks should be able to choose which room you can break out to. They will have the title of the room will be the first name of the panelist and their organization. In the case of James and Camilla, you'll be in the same room. I will mention too, if folks don't have a certain update of Zoom, we're going to have to facilitate and assign folks manually to get in a room. So if you have questions about where you can go for that, we'll be here in that main room to assign folks. So myself, Michael, and Bree will be assigning folks. If you have a room that you want to go to specifically, just mention in the chat directly to myself, Michael, or Bree which room you want to go to, and we'll assign you there. I haven't heard from Baron at all. Michael, do you see Baron in the room anywhere?
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I had a phone call that I had to take. Did you just call on me, Robert?
I did. Is there anything that ACLU wanted to talk about?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. And excuse me for being so disheveled, but once I wake up in the morning, this is how my days are. Yeah, the ACLU, we have a very robust agenda this year. Dealing with criminal legal system reform, primarily in 2 buckets. And really quickly, I'll just talk very briefly about the 2 buckets of work. The criminal, and let me put on my, let me show my face. My face is awake here, so let me not hide my face. Okay, cool. Ooh-wee. Okay, so yeah, we're working on to pass the New Mexico Civil Rights Act. As it stands now, our New Mexico Constitution is just parchment. There's no way for folks to sue if they believe their rights have been violated. And this would just sort of create a place where New Mexicans can hear civil rights cases brought by New Mexicans, opposed to going to federal court. And we know what happens when that happens is sometimes a qualified immunity defense comes up, which means and not to get so much in the weeds here because we have a short amount of time, but it's just saying that the plaintiff must prove that there's a case with clearly established circumstances similar to the case. So it makes it nearly impossible to bring civil rights cases in some aspects, right? And also the Civil Rights Act will allow for attorney fees, and that's really important because folks from marginalized communities do not have the money to pay retainers when they believe their rights are violated. One thing we're hearing about that law is that it's going to bankrupt the counties and it's going to make us not be able to retain good public sector employees. And I would just like to say that this bill. Similar legislation has been passed in 6 states and actually about 24 either through legislation or common law, right? And those places are still being insured and they're retaining public employees, right? The other bill we're working on police accountability is a statewide use of force law. New Mexico, like many places in the nation, has one of the lowest thresholds for use of force. And so we would like to see a statewide policy passed that requires de-escalation, intervention, ban on chokeholds, and a necessary standard to protect life. We recently conducted a poll, and it showed that while New Mexicans overwhelmingly love their law enforcement and support their law enforcement, they do want to see some real change, some life-saving change, and see some policy changes. And then I'll just really briefly mention, in the light of COVID, right? Here in New Mexico, last week I had a disturbing email that 6 people passed away from COVID in our Central New Mexico Correctional Facility in Los Lunas, right? That's unconscionable. 9 months into this pandemic, the state of New Mexico, the Department of Corrections has exhibited indifference just beyond belief that people are dying at this rate 9 months into the pandemic. So we would like to see a probation and parole reform bill passed that would end technical violations. For those of you who aren't aware, technical violations are when people are sent back to prison for not committing a new crime. They either had a dirty urine from a drug test, which points to a public health problem, or maybe missed an appointment. That's a serious driver of incarceration in the state. And a 2018 LFC report said that 1/3 of our prisoners were in prison on any given day for technical violations. And the last one I'd like to mention before I give a little bit of time to Joaquin so he can sort of mention a couple things about the private prison bill. But we would like to see simple possession defelonized. Right now, it's a huge driver of incarceration in our state, and it points to a public health crisis. When folks are having a bit of substances to self-medicate, that means we need more services and not to lock people away. That's a big driver of incarceration. My name is Baron Jones. I'm he, him, and his. I'm a senior policy strategist at the ACLU New Mexico. If you scroll through, I put all my contact information in there. And if you have any questions about these bills, please let me know. Sorry for speaking so fast, but Joaquin wants to mention a couple of logistics things about the whatchamacallit.
Before, so Joaquin, we're just going to put you in the breakout room with Baron so that you can talk about the People Over Prisoners bill. So we'll go to do that now. Thanks, Baron. I really appreciate that you joined us this morning, and thanks for the hat too. I appreciate it. I know, I should have that. But
and sorry for missing my cue earlier. I was actually communicating with Joaquin.
It's all good. So we're gonna work into breakout rooms. So again, you have this. If you have the right updated Zoom, you can choose your breakout room. If you don't, it's okay. Stay here in the main room, and we will assign you. So we're just gonna open these up right now. And if folks want to choose a certain room, you are welcome to choose. So it should be popping up on your screen. If not, direct message Michael or Bree or I, and we will make sure to get folks in there. And Joaquin, I'm going to assign you to Baron's room. He is the last one there. Well, all right, y'all. Welcome back to the main room. We just wanted to just close out our day at Impact and Coffee today and say a big, huge thank you to all of our panelists for all of your hard work, and just for everything that's going to happen this session. It's going to be a very interesting session this year. A big thank you to all of our audience members. We had so many people here today, so we really appreciate that y'all showed up. Please, 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 if there's any legislation that you support, please, please, please call your legislators in your area. There's some really important stuff going on. I'm supporting the People Over Private Prisons bill. That's a very important one. We're wasting a lot of money on private prisons here in our state. So please, please check it out as much as you can. What else was I going to say? Michael, is there anything you wanted to add before we close out today?
No, just best of luck to all of you and the legislative work that you do in the next month. Got it.
Thanks, Michael. Big thanks to our Impact and Coffee team, Michael, Juan, Aaron, Danny, and Bree. This is Bree's last Impact and Coffee, I think, so we're going to wish Bree in her new venture and her new chapter. Thank you so much, Bree, for all your hard work. We'll love you and miss you, but we know that you'll stay in touch, too. So I hope everyone has...
Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, Bree. We hope everyone has a really great Tuesday and a really great rest of your week, and we'll see you next Tuesday for a very special Impact and Coffee on housing and evictions here in New Mexico. We have a really special group of folks to join us for there. So have a great week, have a great Tuesday, and may all your lights be green. See you soon.